Welcome to QCA. We are going to just stick with one question today. We've been actually talking about it. We just finished home lab in it, and as you know, I've been building out my home lab here, and which is built composed of about $25,000 worth of leftover computers from my school that I ran for years, and it kind of raised the question, well, what are you gonna do next? And then that kind of led into the question, well, what's the best way to learn Linux? And there are many ways. So I'm just going to throw them out, and we're going to have like a free for all, get ready to rumble kind of thing. And then we'll have a friendly debate about this. And I want to hear your arguments. I want to hear what you have to say I have been seeking the best possible way to help people as young as 9 years old learn Linux. And I'm not even kidding. And since, 2013, and I have some opinions on this, and I'm going to throw out what I think the best way is. But every year it slightly alters, and it depends on a number of things. So first of all, are you with, not just how to learn Linux, but how to help somebody learn Linux. Let's say that. So help someone learn Linux, because that's really what it's about. And it's not teaching them. It's like helping them do their own thing and helping them, stay within their capacity. And yeah, so it really depends on the person. So when I was a skill stack, everybody knows, I had people who were in person. They were with me at first. We had, groups up to 8-9 people. We had TAs 1-to-3 ratio, and we had all of this hardware. And so for the first 5 to 7 years at Skill Stack, we had a central server that I ran at my house, which was also where I worked. We were in a townhome, and everybody would bring their own laptops, or they would use our cheap ass Acer laptops, and they would get onto them, and we put Linux on them on the desktop, but they didn't really care, because they would just it could get on any machine, and they would SSH in. And for a long time, we were actually running Windows, because we had game development that used things in SolidWorks and stuff that uses Windows only. And so for probably the first 3 years at Skill Stack, we used PuTTY to SSH into a central server that I managed, and it was a multi-user system. Initially it was not internet facing, so we didn't have to deal with passwords and stuff. And then later that grew into an internet facing server, and kids' accounts were getting hacked all the time, because I made a tough decision and let them use passwords, because they could use the passwords from, outside on the internet, and they could go home and they just use the password rather than, and I would, find the hack systems, and then we would fix it and everything. And then they would, but then eventually it got so problematic. It's so hard to set up an SSH key for a student who's going to go home and work on any computer anywhere. And a lot of these kids would do this work on SkillSec. They would one of them got sent to the principal's office actually for doing that. But they would, they're on their Mac, their one-on-one deployments in their middle school or whatever, and they would SSH into skillstack.sh, and they would, hang around, and they would work because they were bored. So at the time we would run an SSH over port 443, which is normally a web port, because it would bypass all the security firewall stuff, and they could, do their skill stack stuff when they were bored at school. And it was a real big win, because they could collaborate, they could talk on the server to each other. And they could do all of those things. And so having that central server really worked in that environment. The only downside of it was, number one, that it was insecure. People would get hacked all the time. Their passwords get brute forced, and we'd have to reset it. Now, there was nothing over there that anybody cared about losing. So it was never that kind of a thing. Oh, hi. Hi, this is my wife, Doris.
A little here, but I was actually very nice.
Okay.
Complimented me on how nice I was.
Okay.
In that situation. I know
That's going to be saved for we're recording a YouTube video right now, but I love having hugs in my YouTube videos. It works really good. It's good content. Come here. Give me another.
Look, I made you some content.
This is my wife. She's back from a hard day.
Click. I a new appreciation of my work day. He said
because he worked.
Asked me to cook him food when I come home.
Oh yeah, they both went to go make art all day. So.
And it was only a half day. We weren't even
there
all day.
That's crazy.
We caved after about 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, I'll be done at 10:30 here. 9:30. So, huh?
You're
gonna be asleep?
Yeah.
Damn. All right, I'll sneak in bed after that. We're both busy. Horse Shigarami. Anyway, so what were we talking about? We were talking about the best way to help somebody learn Linux. I was kind of rambling on about how we originally did it with a central server and how people would get hacked and how we had to do some other stuff. Um, and and but the other big downside of it was people would leave SkillStack and they couldn't do Linux because they didn't have a machine. And so I would let them have their account forever, but then it was really a problem because some of them would leave and they would stop using their account, or some of them would use their account too much. And I never knew who was hacking their account or who was actually using their account, who they gave it to or anything. So, and that was kind of a problem because, at one point at least DigitalOcean told me, hey, your server here has been used to hack somebody. We took it down. And, with a botnet because somebody made their password or some stupid thing like that. So I couldn't let that proceed. I knew that it wasn't a risk to us, but it was definitely a risk to, the other people that were there. So anyway, that was not optimal. So the next thing we did is we put, we had everybody. I mean, it was a while after that, but I had everybody bring me a computer, and we would put Linux on that computer. We would install Linux from scratch on that computer, and then they would have that computer. And you didn't get to come to SkillStack unless you had a computer you could put a Linux on. And I was at a place financially where I could do that. Normally, I wouldn't have done that before because that was kind of a bar of entry. So many parents are such tightwads, by the way. Can I just say this? There are so many parents, they're like, what? My son needs a computer to learn coding? Can he just use the family computer? And I'm like, no, not if he wants to learn it. He needs to have, they need to have access. I was like pulling teeth. So, but I had enough people in my school. I was like, you know what? You can't get in unless, there's one, I would have an interview with them. Actually, I started having interviews to keep, that's a whole story by itself. But I started having interviews with people to decide whether their family was going to be allowed to come into SkillStack because I didn't want to make bad entries anymore. I mean, I had some really bad problems that I don't want to talk about with people that just very entitled people. And I want to stay positive, so I'm not going to go there. But the point is that we would, and we tried Raspberry Pi for a while, but it wasn't quite enough, right? They'd go home and they didn't have a monitor for anything. So I said, look, you need to have a laptop. At the time, I said, look, you have to have a laptop. So they would bring in an old laptop. They go buy an Acer for $400 or $200, and I would show them where they could get them. They'd pay $200-300 for a laptop. They would get them. The kids were crazy happy because that was the first time they got a dedicated laptop, and because we were putting Linux on there, yes, they could play games and stuff, but it wasn't crazy games, right? And if they screwed it up, they had to fix it. So they became these little system administrators really early on, and I had people. And some of them couldn't use a laptop, and I told them, look, if you can't buy a laptop, you can rent one of our laptops. So I would give him one of our laptops, our Acers that we'd had around forever. By the way, Acers are crazy good for this kind of thing, for the cost. And I said, look, you just pay extra $10 or whatever. And by the end of a couple of years, I just gave them the laptop because they'd paid it off, and then and they would have a laptop. And so that was the in-person experience. So my question is, I mean, that entire in-person experience is no longer possible because of, the nature of what we're doing now on Twitch and internationally. We're reaching more people, maybe not as personally as I'd like, but we're reaching out to more people through these mechanisms and at far lower cost to most people. I mean, I do appreciate the support and everything, and I have a full-time job to make the ends meet. But so here's the question. How do I take that and put that into something online? And 2 years ago, when we did 3 years ago when we did the boost, I just said, look, you got to get a computer and you got to install Linux on it. You're on your own. And that isolated a ton of people who didn't know anything about how to do that. But a few did, and they hung around as long as we kept doing it. And in the second year, I was like, we need to make it easier for people to get to the command line. So we did the Docker containers, and that worked fine. The famous Beaver thing. And this year we did a virtual machine, and And in the middle of all of that, I actually taught at a private school, and I tried to use Replit as a way to learn the command line, and the network did not support use of Replit, which is free. Yeah, and um, and so when that happened, I realized that Replit was not a sustainable solution for groups in a bad network, but perhaps something like this could be okay. Replit does give you command line access. It does allow you to code and everything, but it doesn't let you do all the stuff that we teach in the boost, like setting up tmucks or customizing your Vim or doing all of those things because your container goes away. And yeah, in this game it's probably not good. I agree. I like the idea of having skin in the game, and so we talked about this, and I'm going to start with my initial conclusion, but this came about because my let's see if we're still running. So this week I've been setting up my servers over here, and I set up pfSense to change the IPs, and I'm running IPv6 internally at home. And something about that change has caused my VMware Anton instance to start freezing. And it goes into an infinite CPU loop and everything, and it just starts. I have no idea what it is. And we found out that if you pause and unpause the instance, that it comes back, right? When it freezes like that, you have to go do that. But it's definitely a bug in VMware or something in the kernel or the interaction. I believe it's related to perhaps some of the virtual networks in there or whatever. I don't know. I have no idea. But if something like that were to happen to a beginner, that would be hard. It is easy and fast to install a virtual machine player and to install a VM. And that is by far the least pain. But I don't feel like you're really learning all of Linux when you do that. I really feel like the best way to learn Linux is to have some hardware, to have some iron in your possession. And so, what do you think? Anton's VMware, yeah. I don't know if it's IPv6. I don't know that for sure. I think most people agree that bare metal. So here's the question: do you think beginners should start with a laptop or a server? Because the question about having a server came up. If you have a laptop, right? If you go down, you paid $100 or $200 for like an Acer laptop, Walmart special, and you put Linux on that. Chances are today in 2022 that, and it'll be 2023 boost that we do this, that laptop is going to work out of the gate with Linux on it, right? Laptop's a smaller footprint. The other thing I like about having someone get a laptop to put Linux on, and people would ask me all the time, like, "Well, I'm going to dual boot." No, you don't need to dual boot. If you have the money to dual boot and you have a computer that will run gaming, then pay like $200 or $300 for like a really crazy old laptop to run Linux on, and then spend the other money on an MSI Triton or something for like $1,500 and run max settings on all your games. Buy a Windows machine for gaming. Use the right tool for the job. You can fight with me all day about it, but the best tool for gaming is a Windows PC. That is, without doubt, the objective winner when it comes to gaming. PC Master Race is a meme for a reason. And look, I love the progress that Linux has made, but it is not anywhere near what you can do on a Windows machine. So why do you have to put them together? Why can't you separate them out, get yourself a nice lightweight, MSI Triton like I have over here? I got 6 of them actually in the rack over here, and use that for your gaming, and then buy a really cheap ass, laptop and put Linux on there and run Linux as a desktop. And then you can do all your hacking from stuff from that. And then you can go ahead and game your heart to your heart's content using the other thing. In fact, you can even, access, your laptop from your Windows machine if you really want to, right? And you can run a Windows you could probably do that if you want. You're spending the same amount of money, right? And so having the two machines has a multiple advantage. The idea did come up. I mean, I learned Linux by putting crazy old hardware that smelled of cat piss, because somebody thrown it away literally, and and plugging an ancient VGA monitor into it and an ancient keyboard, and putting Linux on it, Linux in the garage. And so I think there's something amazing about that, because you can run Linux on ancient, or particularly if you run it headless. And that was how I learned Linux. So I I don't know if that's the best way though. I think it is, because in the process I learned about networking. I learned what a NIC was. I wasn't afraid of breaking anything because it was all old used crap anyway. Uh, yeah, I mean, my very first Linux experience was Mock Linux. It was an old PowerPC, and I installed Linux on there, and I could never get anything more than the terminal to work. Your laptop's harsh, by the way. And recycling old machines. I do think that having a laptop and having graphic Linux on your laptop is worth having. I do. I really like it. I like having. In fact, I've gotten kind of spoiled by my Mac Pros and everything, because I just use the terminal all day, every day. I don't really care about the rest. But if you can find you can almost always. Like I said, I've got like 10 old laptops in the other room. You can put really old Linux hardware, Linux on there. So I think that that's probably the best way to go. But here's the problem. Do you think forcing someone, or encouraging, we'll say, do you think encouraging someone to acquire hardware, used or otherwise, before they learn Linux and their very first command line interactions, do you think that is wise? Because I've done it both ways. Look, the people logging into the cloud, like SSHing into a multi-user system, was a absolute win. Everybody loved it. I had people up and running in VI within 40 minutes on their first day. I made a cheat sheet that showed up to them when they logged in. They would log in and they knew exactly what to do. They had the terminal, so they were already happy. They were already thinking they were a hacker, and they were connected to this remote server in New York. You know what I mean? Or I mean, at the time it was DigitalOcean. Eventually it was New York. And they loved that. They loved that. That really, and they were immediately working on the command, immediately, like after the first day. And so there was a bunch of return and investment for that, because they were, and they could go log into it anytime they wanted to, of the boot process, underlying hardware. Yeah. So, but the people that learned it that way, they loved SkillStack. They absolutely loved it. But when it come time to part with it or something, they were like, well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to have a server. What do I do after I leave here? And then it started to fall down. It started to fall on its face, because they're like, well, you can just start up your own server. And for a while, actually, I did help them start having their own DigitalOcean instances. And then I got crap from parents who didn't want to pay their $6 a month for their kid to have a server. I'm not even kidding. I am not even kidding. I had parents that were, paying me all kinds of money. And then I would say, well, you eventually probably want your son or daughter to have their own server at home. And they're like, I don't have the money for that. I'm paying you. And I'm like, okay. And they would pay me, but then they would leave. And then I was like, I never got a chance to let them, have their own remote server, and they wanted to run Minecraft and all that kind of thing. Right. So, where's my server login credentials? Hey, how are you? Because of greedy bootloaders. Yes. From startup to bash prompt used to be an awesome how-to. Yeah. I think you're right, Enchanting Wolf. That's what I'm getting at. I don't think that, I mean, and there's a number of issues about making a home lab too, particularly if you're young. Okay. So when people go around collecting junk to make a home lab, which I think is fantastic, by the way, because it does, bring new life into old hardware, almost immediately they want to put their server on the internet. So this is another problem I had. Right. So for a while there, I was recommending that people buy Mac Minis and set them up as servers, because Mac Mini at the time was very robust Linux server. Actually, you can obviously get things that are a lot cheaper than Mac Mini these days. But consider this. So they go home and they connect it, and now these are the same kids who used to log into the cloud and SSH into the cloud from school. but now they can't SSH into their home server anymore without really, really opening up their home network to all kinds of security and hacking. So let me ask you that question. I mean, we have plenty of time to talk about it still, but here's the next question. So if the hands-on experience with building your own server is the right thing to do, what happens after that? I'm starting to feel like that the laptop suggestion is the best one for most beginners, because well, yeah, you can set up proxy stuff, but we're talking about beginners, right? And so I mean, we're talking about absolute beginners. We're talking about people who just barely learn the terminal command line and barely can tell you how a network works. And now we're going to tell them to how are we going to even tell them to go in and set up pfSense, or to go in to figure out their router and port forward port 22 to their server, or the Minecraft port, or anything. You see what I'm saying? It gets really hairy really fast, and that's when the cloud really starts to shine. Beginners just need access to the terminal. Setup has always been a barrier to entry. I agree. Local VMs for beginners is the right thing. Well, that's what we've been doing. I think local VMs on Windows or Mac, and just getting used to the terminal and getting used to SSHing into it, because they have to SSH into it from their Windows machine, even though it's running on their same computer. They still have to SSH into it. But I do think this, like, using a VM is a little misleading, in my opinion, because they don't. It takes, it's kind of a stretch to grasp that you have a machine running inside of your machine, if that's the first way you've done it. If you're a programmer, dev generator, home network, I agree. You need to know about that. Maybe have a Discord to follow up how to do it. Yeah. Oh, Matt. Oh my goodness. Look at you go. Thank you for those subs. Set up your laptops in a Docker Swarm cluster in colleges for lab. Yeah. Use SSD. I think you could do that too. But then, so I'm really torn between two standard things to tell people. One, acquire a laptop. Matt, thank you so much for the subs. Appreciate it, my friend. One, acquire a cheap ass, that's an official technical term, laptop. Because why? Because it's another reason I think you should have a laptop. If you have an Ubuntu desktop on a laptop, or Linux Mint, Linux Mint, yeah, Linux Mint is, in my opinion, I mean, I used to have people put Papa Was on there, but not anymore. So Linux Mint, so if they put Linux Mint on a laptop, they can take that laptop anyway. I had one boy, I'm reminded of, his parents reported to me that they went on a vacation and they were stuck in the car. I'm so glad I remembered this. Because this is really going to inform this decision. So the parents couldn't stop talking about their son while he was in the car. He was obsessed with writing code. And he had learned enough Python. We were teaching Python at the time. We were learning Python. He had learned enough Python, and he was running, off car battery, and he was, running Ubuntu or Linux Mint on an Acer, a cheap ass Acer that I believe we were renting that to him, and eventually I gave him to him, but he was back there coding away. That's not something that could happen if they, as their first activity, made a server with all the, clean the cat stuff out of there and everything. Or if they were dependent on the cloud. That would not have happened. And the other thing too about having a laptop is that sense of ownership. Like, I have something in my possession. This is a Linux machine that I built. And a couple of the kids actually, and I mean, they were, young, but they literally took them apart and bought some stuff, some refurbished stuff, and they put their own, they swapped out their own hard drives and everything. They did all of it themselves. It was amazing. We got all the stuff for it, and we took it apart. So, it needs good heatsink compound reapplied. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. A tool in the hand is worth two in the trash. I think you're right. Yeah. Or two in the cloud. I'm gonna rephrase your saying there, Jalopy. A tool in the hand is worth two in the cloud. A Linux box a Linux box on my lap is worth five in the cloud. I have a 4-port physical NIC to assign to my VMs now. Woot, nice. So I think that I've answered this sufficient. We did that in about a half an hour. But does anybody else have anything more to say? So there are a couple of conclusions here for me related to my home lab and to the beginner boost. Because I have found tools in the trash. I believe it. Hardware requirements for the SSD connection speed, yes. So yeah, keep calm and learn Linux. The other thing about having a laptop that's better than a server is I don't know how to say this delicately, so I'm just going to spit it out. All of the bull crap on YouTube and Twitch about, ricing your Linux and your desktop and stuff that appeals to beginners that I've very much grown past. I don't give a shit about that anymore. I just want a tool that works and does the job, and that's usually always just a terminal. However, when you're young and you don't, it's your first experience with Linux, the first time you see a custom desktop manager that's all tricked out to look like the Matrix or whatever your favorite sci-fi is, and you get to fight about so many extra tasks on Reddit. They're look. I have to remember when I started, and I will not lie. When I started, I distro hopped like 5 times, and was constant. I mean, I spent an ungodly amount of time customizing my Windows themes because it was fun. It was fun, and it was kind of gamified, computerization stuff. So 5 times I don't know. I had one guy. So, and I make fun of that, but the fact of the matter is that is a really important part of joining the Linux culture. I mean, that whole, do you run Arch or what's your window manager? You use i3 or something? I'm always like, well, I use Tmux as my window manager. That's not a window manager. What the hell? What's your theme? What are your colors? Blah, 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 right? And, I mean, I hate to be a wet blanket, but I'm like, I don't need it. So, yeah. If I just to cover a fraction of the main branch. Oh, I know. Neo Matrix on a 4-core VM that runs okay. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's an entire, Linux porn Reddit, which is just people who have made their Linux look absolutely beautiful. And I, here's me with my Groovebox thing. But I watched Alhauser the other today, and he's got the same retro term or something he's turned on the retro thing that Chris has, which I did like 2 years ago. And I just think it's fun. People love art and making your terminal look pretty to your liking, or your computer behave the way you want it to. That's all the animation, everything. I set up 4 monitors by, hunting and pecking all of the settings for x86 config in 2002. So, the point I'm trying to make is that a laptop as your first way to learn Linux, a cheap ass laptop, that's our technical term, is by far the best way to learn Linux. Because why? Because you can't hurt it, right? You're not going to impact the family computer. You're going to have a sense of ownership. It'll work no matter where you go. You can swap it out and put whatever you want on there anytime you feel like it. And you can make it pretty, and you can put stickers on it. You can put all your Linux stickers on there, right? And these are all rites of passage. I don't do any of that anymore because I'm just too much wasted energy. But my coffee cups got more stickers on it than my computers do these days. but I get it. But I get it. And so you get to join, the Linux culture and be a part of the tribe and all that jazz, and start, subscribing to DistroTube and all the other people that love to talk about all these different things, even though they may not actually work in the industry, which is fine. It's totally fine. That is a part of it. I'm not putting them down. I appreciate what they do a lot. And look, that includes like coming to your own conclusions about whether you want to use Emacs or Vim or Nano or NeoVim and all those things, and you're entitled to participate fully into all of that. And you should do that. You should do that. You should make all of your own decisions about that. Use them all. Yeah. Yeah. Make your own kernel in Rust. Hell yeah. You can't do that, in a VM. Well, yes, you can. But so here's actually the baseline question. How much harder is it to put Linux on a laptop than it is to put Linux in a VM? Okay, so let's compare the steps, right? If you get a laptop, let's assume you already have a laptop. You got the whole BIOS thing to fight with, right? You got to figure out how to boot off a USB stick. You got to do all that, right? But you still have to have a USB stick, a virtual USB stick, to do a virtual machine. You know what I'm saying? I'm from WD Drive through USB. It's a bit laggy. Yeah. So PSTs plus Emacs stuff. Yeah. And that's another thing about having a laptop is, and PF Sense has been a big reminder over here. I want to show you guys this, but oh, okay. I've been OPN Sense. I've got OPN Sense running now. Wait. Oh, it's root. I think it's root. What? What is going on? Well, I'll have to figure this out. Not right now, though. I must have turned my SSH server off over there. Anyway, so I set up my own firewall and it's running BSD, and I was reminded of a bunch of things that don't work on BSD, like, I don't know, IP and stuff. So I think that having your own laptop, again, that lets you do your own BSD thing. And what are the comparisons? Well, a standalone server, you still have to have all this stuff, and you have to be able to SSH into it, which you don't. The downside of having a laptop is you're not learning the SSH stuff right away, right? Because you don't have to do it. You have to set up if you want to do any Git stuff. And perhaps the next thing you do after that is you buy a server, you get a server put in your house, then you SSH into that thing. And I think that's probably the natural progression I'm going to go with suggesting, because I don't know. I feel like we've had the most success with that. I'll put it this way. It does take people a lot longer to learn the command line when they go this route, because we spend, and this the last 2 years, if you watch the Boost, you hear me gripe about it all the time. Following that technique of having people build their own Linux computer before we even start using the command line automatically delays the learning of the terminal and all that stuff for about a month. So in that case, it'd be, 4 times 5 for about 2-3 weeks, right? 2-3 weeks of 4-hour boosts each. So, how many run their labs on prem in a basement or garage? A lot do, right? So it's going to take courage, and we're not going to make a decision right now, but I'm of the opinion as of this moment that I'm going to revise. So 2021 Boost, we did Docker as the first experience with a terminal. And I still think you need to learn Docker. I really do. 2020 Boost. 2021 Boost, we did VMware, and we did VirtualBox, and that fell into the toilet. And then we did VMware. And now I'm having problems with VMware, even though I still think it's a really valid way to go. I do think you still need to learn virtual machines. I don't know whether we should do all of it or not. I mean, should we learn how to have set up a laptop and how to use a virtual machine and how to do, you know what I'm saying? I feel like you need to have those things. I feel like you need to know how to use VMware on Windows as a part of, basic IT learning. But if But if we just have the laptop, they're all essential. But can we say, because here's the reason I'm thinking about this, because next year, assuming we go this route and we say, look, you can't even do the boost until you have a laptop on which you can install Linux. And what we'll say from like the beginning of May or whatever is like, if, or even before May the 4th is when we begin the boost every year. Every year we have May the 4th is when we begin, and we change it every year because things change and we learn stuff. And for example, Docker Desktop became a proprietary application, and that killed Docker. I didn't want anything to do with it after that. And neither do most companies, by the way. So, a server laptop is also host for VMs. Yes, that's true too. So this is kind of what I'm thinking. I think that the boost, the very first thing you should do is install Linux on a laptop, a cheap ass laptop. That's our official title. And by the way, Linus does tech. Linus Tech Tips. Linus Tech Tips has some great Huawei, Walmart specials for installing Linux. They're like $200 laptops that are like crazy good. So I don't think you should do SSD. I really don't. And the reason for that is, you could do that, but the problem with that is that they're probably, anytime you mix systems, particularly with beginners, you run a real serious risk because this is why I cannot recommend dual booting. And I've heard this from so many other people as well. Yes, it can be done safely. How many times has somebody blown away either Windows or their Linux work because of dual boot? I think you lose one of the greatest advantages of having a laptop that's dedicated to Linux when you do that, which is I can distro hop like crazy. I can stick the USB in. I can set up the bootloader. I know how to do that. And I can just, you can boot all of Linux just right off the USB stick if you wanted to. But I think for the boost, at least, I'm going to require that you be okay, like wiping the disk drive and putting something, putting just Linux on there. Windows does not like other boot methods. I know. And I've had a lot of personal experience with people who've had that experience, and, inevitably it just goes down poorly. I know it's gotten better, but, by the way, if you do that, make sure you install Windows first and then put Mint after that. That's a pretty reliable install. But yeah, just use Linux all the time. Yeah. I don't think dual booting is wise. I've done it. I did it in my lab for a long time because we had to play Overwatch, for the birthday parties, and that was Windows only. And there was no Vulkan back then or anything. I mean, there was, but yeah. In the first command, get rid of the whole thing. Yeah. So the downside of having a laptop is they're probably going to break it, right? They're going to break it. They're going to RM-RF, whatever. And they're going to do things. They're going to install things. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to get viruses. And that's okay as long as you use Git to do all of your saving of code and everything. I think you should assume that your laptop is going to get struck by lightning at any moment all the time. I just do. I really think that you should never trust any single device to not just evaporate, and there's a few things on my system here that are not saved to Git, but I need to make sure that, this whole Anton thing's been reminding me of that. If you do this right, hey Dan, if you do this right, you can go ahead and just delete the whole thing and then just, okay, I'll make a new Anton and pull down your Git. Boom, you're good to go. You haven't lost anything. You've lost some time. Maybe you've lost some game stats or something, but you haven't really lost anything because all the real stuff is where, it's in GitHub or something. I don't use cloud storage. I use GitHub for everything. If I have never had a situation where I have so much storage, like videos and stuff, that I would want to save it someplace else. If I did that, I would definitely just have an external USB drive and then maybe mirror that to another USB drive. And I'm thinking of doing that because as we go into the podcasting arena, I might want to, I have to keep, backups of some of these things to make podcasts out of them. My first bare metal install was the F word. After every step until you got to the desktop. Yes. But you know what? You raise a good point though, random X user, because when you actually do get Linux installed on your very first laptop or your first server, I mean, do you remember that feeling? Do you remember that feeling when you could log into it and you could go over and SSH into it, or you just show someone who had absolutely no knowledge of what Linux was, what it was you were doing, and you would show them, and it's just like such an amazing feeling. And this has been really informative. I really appreciate all of the great input from the stream and the community today, because this is the reminder I needed about the awe and joy of Linux. And a lot of that is things that I've grown out of, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I still do too. That's why I'm building up my servers over here. I'm like SSHing into them, and I'm like, oh my god, these things are so cool. I forgot all about this and that. And I'm like using NetPlan in Ubuntu 22, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so amazing, And that's why I chose it as a job. So let's face it. If someone, in college, sometimes they'll have a filter course. They'll have a course that's so hard, like Physics 101, that's designed to filter you out so you don't do it. And like if you hate it, you're like, oh, this isn't for me, right? And so I am going to stick by the recommendation, which is directly against the advice I gave this boost in 2020-21, because of the time it's going to take. But here's another thing: when I was all stuck on the time thing before, I was trying to finish everything in 18 weeks. We've already blown past 18 weeks of the boost, so the boosts are they finish when they finish, right? And people ask, well, how long is it going to take? When am I going to get my certificate? What certificate? There's no certificate. Can I get a job? I'm like, I don't know. This is very organic. We're just going to go through it as we need, and that's always how I've done it. It always works. It might not be everybody's method. They want to be more, snap, get to it. And by the way, there's nothing stopping you from working faster than I am covering in any of the boosts. I mean, I got a comment the other day, I had to delete it because the guy's like droning on about how long it took me to get through the boost for the 4 hours. And I'm like, this is what people wanted. They didn't want me to go tell them what to do because you can just do that on your own. All you need is a book or somebody to tell you what to do. You don't need to just listen to this dude. And the last boost we had, everybody actually asked for me to be more hands-on, just to go through all the steps, no matter how long it took. And now we're on week 19 of the boost, and we probably won't finish before Christmas. I guarantee you we won't finish before Christmas next year if we add installing Linux onto a laptop. In fact, that we probably want to allocate 2 weeks for that. But here's the way we can get around that. I'm anticipating something here. They don't grok out. Yeah. There are people, and I've told everybody that this year, 2022, and I'm going to do this for 2022 as well as 21, there's more hand-holding in the boost. And by hand-holding, I mean I'm literally doing it with you because you need it. But the first couple of boosts that I did, particularly the first one, I was like, y'all don't need any hand-holding. Become autodidacts overnight. Here's what you need to go learn and go do it. If you have questions, let me know. And that was assuming way too much on behalf of the people that have been inundated and indoctrinated into the traditional learning systems, which are very, very, hands-on. The people are not taught to be autodidacts. And we've covered this a lot. I don't want to get into that again right now, but based on it, so this boost got really long. The whole point of like talking about why is the boost long is that we no longer, the initial concern I had about setting up a laptop and talking someone through it was two things. One, it was going to take a long time to talk people through how to set up and install Linux on a laptop. And they would, I don't know if we need editing, but yeah, I need a lot of things. Yeah, add it to the list. And I mean, I'm really grateful to people that have been doing the chapter markers. We've had chapter markers in QCA. Props to all those people who have been doing that because it sure helps everybody save time. I do not have time to do that. I barely have time to meet the demands of work and streaming. So I'm happy to be here to do that, but I can't. It's going to be messy, and if people don't like that, I'm sorry. The people who polish content on YouTube, first of all, they have really, really polished content. Sometimes that's dead wrong. because they spend all the time polishing it rather than checking their data. I'm not going to point fingers, but that happens all the time. Or they're not in the industry and their job is streaming. And then they're constantly falling out of touch with the actual stuff. And that's what happened when I started SkillStack. That's why I'm having so much catch up to play, even with things like Docker and Kubernetes, because I was doing SkillStack. I didn't need it back then. So why the point about the time elongation of the boost? Because since we are okay going into Christmas, even beyond Christmas, I don't have a problem adding an extra 2 weeks of content to talk about how to do it. And number two, I have a capture card now so that I can show you exactly what is on the computer screen, including the BIOS. And this is something I did not know how to do last year. Strangely enough, talk about yak shaving. All of my IRL streaming that I've been doing, I've been doing a lot of IRL streaming, on the road using this Jetson Nano rig with the Sony Cam, and that it requires that you have a capture card, an Elgato capture card, and that ended up being the education that I need. Because the other day I was like, I wonder if I plug this capture card into this HDMI slot on this ancient laptop that I want to put Linux on. And lo and behold, I've got a new video source that I can put on the screen that you can see with me, just the same as I would be looking at the screen there. So, and I just mirror it and we're good to go. So the point I'm trying to make is I now know how to show you exactly what is on the screen of any old hardware whatsoever, right? And frankly, as a part of Home Lab and I will be streaming some of that because I have a ton of laptops that I want to go through and reimage, and I will be reimaging them live using OBS as my terminal, as my screen. So you'll get to see exactly the same things that I get to see while we do it. And because I can do that, next year's boost, we should be much better able to help people install Linux on their hardware. The hardest part about helping people with this is all of the hardware is different, right? But that's one of the things you have to learn as a Linux guy or girl. You cannot assume that you're going to know how the BIOS works. You've got to become that hacker autodidact because you have got to do the research on your specific, cheap ass computer's BIOS. And what I tell you is going to be different. I can tell you generally what to look for, but you have to go look for it all. Yeah. I don't think we should dual boot. No, we're not gonna dual boot. No. So yeah. And then, I wanted to get thanks for the preach thing. Bash before machine fiddling. I do too, Mossy. I do. I think they're going to want to learn the terminal stuff. And this is why I made a full hour dedicated to this question and we're coming up on 5 minutes before we should close it up. But this has been one of the core frustrations since I started SkillStack in 2013. This has been one of my core, what I want is the perfect part of both worlds, right? I want them to be able to bring up their own machine and also code on the terminal. I wonder if we could stagger that. What does everybody think about that? The brash prompt how to was a good counterpoint. Yeah, there's yeah. So, I mean, okay. So one possibility would be that we could stagger it. So the first day we would use the terminal through a web browser. Or through SSH, we get, download the terminal, get putty on there, and SSH into a server, and boom, we're on a terminal. You know what I mean? And I can, whether I set up a server for that, I'm glad we're talking about this because that's one of the things I wanted to do with my server over here. Or, we, another thing we could do is, and frankly, it's kind of fun actually. This is great. I'm glad we're talking about this. One of the things we could do every single time we do a boost, I could actually fire up a new server in the cloud, right? And it cost me like, $15 a month. It's nothing. I mean, because we're just using terminal stuff, right? We're just learning how to code up there and you're learning how to get into GitHub and all that stuff, right? And so what we could do is we could actually fire it up and show people how to make a connection to the server using a password initially, and then actually I could make it so they could submit their own public keys. We can make basically what I'm getting at is that in the boost next year on the first day we say go connect, and we can even have everybody connect as the same user account. Honestly, and there's a million other places you can go get a free server, but I would want to have control of the server because I would want to put things there that said welcome and then gave my own tutorials, and I could put Skillbot up there and a bunch of things like that. And not only that, but if we even did a multi-user system, it's kind of fun to hack your neighbor. So like if you set up a cloud server, a multi-user cloud server, and going into it that it's going to get hacked and people are going to make mistakes and stuff, that you could just tell everybody from right out of the gate. It's like, don't do anything you care about over here. This is just a place for you to come mess around, and it's totally okay for you to mess with your friends. So if you find somebody's got bad permissions over there, you can make it kind of like a hacker atmosphere. And we used to do that. We used to have competitions like that. We'd set up 2, and then we'd have something where they'd have to go find it. But it's a multi-user system. So the only downside of that is the IP divulging, and I don't think we can do it because of that thing alone. That was one of the worst parts of Pico CTF. I think that's probably why they got rid of the multi-user server finally, because you got kids logging. Look, I don't care about knowing my IP, but there are people that would want to participate in the boost that would not want to give up what region they were coming from, and they have no idea what a VPN is. So that's another reason to not use a multi-user cloud server, because you would be handing over IPs like crazy, and that's not cool. It's not dangerous to give out your IP if you don't mind people knowing where you live, and you're behind any reasonable, provider these days. And that I'm not the only one who said that. Nahamsek said the same thing. Very exact. I asked him point blank because I got a clip of it. So I don't think the cloud is an option unless they want to create their own clouds. But then there's also can a cloud VM use a VPN? Yes, I think. I mean, the easy thing to do here, especially since we don't care about internet. The problem I had in the school is not going to be a problem. We could just go do this. So you can use Replit right away for this kind of stuff. And I mean, Replit's really famous at this point. It's got an in-browser IDE as well. So the problem is it's coding based, and you can't do customizations. You can learn VI and everything, but it's mostly based on coding and not so much based on like a terminal. There are free terminals out there, free clouds out there, yeah. But the other problem I used to have is that the kids are so young, some of them, that they can't get a DigitalOcean account. They'd have to buy one. And so I actually created a team for everybody, and I just invited them to my team. And they didn't have to go through the hassle of putting their credit card information, getting their mom and dad to set it up for them. So I don't know. I think it might be a combination of building your own laptop and setting up a VM. I think that's probably going to be the right way to go. A lot of people love Linode. I haven't used it ever, but I'm more of a fan of DigitalOcean personally. Yeah. Jumpbox to the event. These are great ideas. They're just not beginner friendly. Yes, it's just, yeah, it is. So I don't know. I mean, as we were talking about, I think people have to know about starting up a virtual machine, and they need to know how to make an actual machine. You know what? Now that I think about it, those two things go together really well. And they don't require cloud access. I think the cloud access should come separately. I really do. Besides, if they set up a virtual machine, then they can SSH into the virtual machine, right? And then they'll be ready to SSH into their laptop or their other server, whatever they want to put it on. I don't know. That's a tough one. I'll have to think about that a little bit more. But yeah, I think what's that? Script login through the Dropbox. Yeah, that's what I used to do. A VirtualBox locally. Well, we use VMware locally. VirtualBox is trash. And I have lots of objective proof of that. You can go read it and look it up. If it works for you, fine. But until it doesn't. VMware and downloading a VirtualBox is what we did in the boost. This or a an OVA file. That is exactly what we did this time. But I feel like it leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to setting up So what I'm trying to decide is, do we just use VMware and then after the boost is over, the first thing we do is we help them set up their own laptops? Or do we say you have to have a laptop before you can do the boost? I personally, even though it's easier to start up with a VirtualBox thing and just start it up and run it, and you can kind of look around at disks and stuff. If you go through the pain and suffering of setting up your own machine, I think that you'll be better suited to dealing with the virtual machine later. I think the first experience with Linux should be a machine, bottom line. I really do. I keep coming back to this and I keep trying to avoid it. It does put people off, and this came about because somebody said people just want to get to the bash command line. They don't want to screw around with the machine. And it's true. It gets exhausting trying to get Linux on there. By the time you get it on there, you're like, okay, now what? And now you can finally do something with it, right? I am a little afraid of showing people how easy it is to not have an actual machine, because then they'll never want to do a real machine. They'll just say, I just want a cloud server. Just give me a VM. I don't need an actual machine. Why would I ever bother with that? I imagine there's a lot of people out there right now, perhaps some listening to me, who have never actually built Linux on hardware, who use Linux every day. Yeah, one of the best decisions. Yeah. The boost after setting up my machine. After setting up your machine. Yeah. And you did a great job setting up your machine. You got a lot of good stuff on there. So, it's being created by people that only know how to spin up VMs or Dockers. Yeah. And Channing Wolf, I wish I could highlight that comment. I really do. Because I've seen that too. I've seen DevOps people. I mean, it's going to get personal, so I don't. There are so many people who don't understand basic networking, who are in it. They just don't. And so I do think that they should set up a laptop. I do. I think install knowing how to flash a drive, knowing how to flash a USB stick with Blenda Etcher, and knowing what's the difference between Blenda and Rufus and DDR. I mean, those conversations are really boring. But here's the thing: if you don't like that, that's okay. And I think that's one of the reasons I got away from it before, because I was trying to cater to people who just want to be coders, and I really don't want to do that anymore. I want to focus on people that want to focus on infrastructure engineering, and you can code software on VS Code and whatever thing you want to code in. That's fine. I don't care. But when it comes to the hands-on infrastructure skills, that starts with metal. It starts with your hands on the metal. Your hands are like poking around in that metal, beginning with, some really cheap aluminum on the USB stick. And that's what a subnet calculator is for. Exactly. Security breaches that never happen due to spinning up old Dockers in production. Oh, yeah. God, I don't even want to talk about it. I don't see you doing any metal. I was doing a lot of metal. It was a lot of boring metal that you wouldn't want to see me doing, Jalopy. I'm sure you would have got really bored. It's all over there. I'll show you. We're going to do some live streaming of the rack that I have set up. It's almost complete. It's almost entirely complete. I spent 6 hours streaming, like me screwing up. Boy, you would have had fun with that. Yeah, I put in it the rack on backwards because I was talking because I had Twitch brain. Anya and I have decided that that's the term. The term is Twitch brain. You're an actual stream. Awesome, awesome. Speaking of hardware, I have some for you. I'll have to send it to you. Hey, Strager's live. He just went live. We should probably go raid him. So we're done for the day, and I guess we're talking about missed our turns. Yeah, well, you get talking, right? Touch Linux on metal where I'm at. Yeah, they don't touch it at all. I think. Look, I'm not saying that you're a bad person because you're using Linux and you've never actually installed it on a computer, but you could be a better person. It's a joke. Don't take it personal. I think you could be a better person by learning how. Like, for example, okay, let me show you. Let me give you one last example. This is where the rabbit hole leads. A bad person. This is where the rabbit hole leads, right? So you start to get devices like this. Here, I'll zoom in. Where's my zoom in? Right? You start to like make your own Cat 5 cable and stuff. I mean, you you start out with like installing Linux on your laptop, and in a year or two you'll be making your own Ethernet cables because it drives you crazy because the cable is like 1 inch too long and it doesn't match up perfectly with your patch panel. So, that's what it was. Yeah, it wasn't a taser. No, that was just a clicky. Yeah, that's for crimping Cat 6, Cat 5 cables. There you go, token ring. No, you got the same crimper. It's pretty popular. It's just a client tool. I have a couple of them actually, but this is a new one I just got. Yeah. Yes, I did make my own Cat 6 actually. And I have a tester for it as well, and they're working. My cables are all working. So, and I've got that's the kind of thing that you do while you're watching television or some Twitch streamer, because you just sit here making cables all day. Linux on bare metal, what's the point? Yeah, well, and people could just watch the 22 boosts if they don't want to do machine setup. Yeah, that sounds funny because it's like so long, You crimp with a screwdriver and a hammer. You're like old school. All the issues of the host OS. That's true. And, it's funny you say that in chatting, because that's exactly what's been plaguing me today. Because I switched over to the pfSense thing, something about the networking is not happy in the kernel. And so VMware, let's see if it's still running. Is it? It should have frozen by now. Nope, good. But it's been like randomly freezing on me, and then I have to pause it and unpause it and I get it back. And that's a VMware problem. That's a VMware, kernel/interaction problem. It has nothing to do with, and if I was running raw Linux, that kind of problem wouldn't happen. I have other problems if I was running Pop OS, which I did. Pop OS went belly up on me multiple times, like majorly belly up, like had to SSH into the machine while it had black screen so I could get my files off there. Bad. That's how bad it was. And I don't want to go through that again. But Linux Mint has been my go-to, and a lot of people still swear by it. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude this video for tonight, this QCA. The one question: what is the best way to help someone learn Linux? And I believe the best way is to have them find an old laptop or a cheap-ass laptop, and to download Linux Mint onto a USB stick, and to learn what it takes to do that, preferably with Balena Etcher. Make sure you click off telemetry, otherwise it's fine. People freak out, it's fine. And then make a USB stick, learn how to boot from that USB stick, which means messing with your BIOS. And if you don't know what your BIOS is, you have to learn about it anyway because it's a big part of IT. So you learn about your BIOS, you boot from that USB stick, you go through the installation steps, and boom, you've got Linux on your laptop. And you don't have to do anything else besides that. Just right away, you can start coding and everything. Um, so that is going to be my suggestion. If you want to try to install Arch or you want to install any other distro, you can certainly do that at any time. And you can, there's ways to get USBs. Actually, there's an installer tool that somebody told me about that I tried to use and it actually didn't work for Ubuntu server and a couple of things. People were like putting a whole bunch of installers onto a single USB, and I can't recommend that anymore because it didn't work. It broke after a couple of them. It worked for some of them, but not for all. I have boot on a USB. Finds boots any OS partition or drive. Interesting. Very cool. I'll take a look at that. So that's it for tonight's tonight's one question QCA. Appreciate you all indulging me to talk about this particular thing, and we'll see you tomorrow, YouTube. Ventoy is the one. Yeah, Ventoy kind of let me down, unfortunately. Yeah, it did not work for something that I was doing, but maybe I'm doing something wrong, so I'll have to go look at it again. Ventoy otherwise is very, very, very cool. Ventoy lets you like drag and drop multiple different Linux distros onto it and then run any one of them as an installer when you boot from it, like with a menu. And so that's something we will talk about in 2022's boost. So if for no other reason than knowing what we're going to cover in 2022, which is coming up next May the 4th, which is quite a ways away, we will have a requirement for people to have Linux. To have a laptop. The other cool thing about that is that there will be people that, you know what, this is great because we can tell them before Christmas time. Yeah. We can have people ask for like cheap Linux computers for Christmas. And then they can get like a really cheap Linux computer and they can practice. I mean, all of that 2 months that we normally would, we could make a requirement that by the first day we say you need to have Linux installed. And then we do kind of like a precursor. Oh, I know. There's so many. Cheap Linux computers sooner than Christmas. Yeah. You want those Raspberry Pis? I know. So, a question. What do you, before we leave this, we're about to leave here. I know I'm on the way out, but what do you think of requiring them to have Linux installed before the boost, and then the boost itself is not related to that? What's wrong with the Pis? Mostly just it's not APT based, and so it's hard. I mean, all of the training that I'm doing is based on APT for servers. I mean, understanding different package managers is definitely important, but the Pi doesn't do it. Pre-boost for machine setup. That's what I'm thinking. I think we might be onto something there, because then what we could do, we could have, our home lab init time or our QCA or all that stuff, right? So starting in January when the boost ends, I mean, we've got that 4 hours on Saturday that, I generally use to prepare for the next boost. I know it doesn't look like I prepare much. I promise you I do. I think, yeah. So, but they're like, but I don't know how to install Linux, right? But the reason we could do that is because every single person is going to have a different experience with Linux. There'll be some people that might want to buy Linux. Frankly, a Raspberry Pi would be fine for the boost. There's nothing in the boost that would require you to use something besides a Raspberry Pi. Some of the install scripts that I'm talking about, sudo apt install stuff, they would not be relevant. I would say for the boost, I would require that, yeah, you could do this. Well, the problem, yeah, we could use the problem. Okay. So the main point here is that every single person who's anticipating doing the boost is going to have their own personal journey with their own personal laptop. We're not going to do Pi. I changed my mind. Pis are overpriced and we can't do any of the APT stuff. So we can't, it's going to be APT based. So it's got to be Debian based, period. And I'm not going to cover anything else. People can do other stuff, but for the boost, I'm not going to cover anything that's not APT based. Cheaper than yeah. Oh, there's so many mini desktops that are cheaper than Raspberry Pi right now. I was just out looking at them. They're crazy cheaper. Yeah, you could get like a full blown mini PC for like $80. It's got 3 times the power of a Raspberry Pi. It's crazy. There's secondhand hardware. So no Pop OS. No. You want to teach them Bash, teach them how Bash interacts with the kernel and that kind of thing. And both extension and pre-boost. I agree. I think you're right. And not to mention, I mean, who knows what we're going to be doing on that time frame on Saturday, right? Assuming we finish the boost in 1 year, I would hate for the boost to go so far. I mean, I don't know what day is this? Is September, October, November? We should finish Go. I mean, I don't want to push Go too fast. Go was kind of an experiment, right? But we still have to do web development. We still have to do a little bit of Docker, and stuff. So the reason we're doing Go first is because I want people to have something to do on their brand new fancy Linux, virtual machine, while they're not around, and then we'll come back and show them how to save it and stuff. We might change the order up a little bit next year, but all right. Thank you, everybody. See you, YouTube.